Good evening. So this is a live stream to just chat about things that we normally don't chat about. So there's only one person on this at the moment, so I'm surprised, hoping for more. But for I might as well just do a bit of an intro. What we'll be looking at tonight. A lot of people sort of are seeing a new era, suspecting a new era. It will be different from the previous Biden administration. That's definitely sure. The world is going to be a very different place with Trump for a whole lot of reasons. I mean, from what I can see, he's decided to change some of the parameters, you could say, of what he wants the world to look like, how he wants the world to sort of unfold. So it's quite interesting in that regard. The policies that he's going to pursue are going to be very different. On the energy front, he's definitely going to amplify the amount of production of fossil fuels, which will be a good thing in actually reducing the amount of inflation in the system. So the problem is there's still a lot of money printing. Recently, he's put a bit of a cap and a freeze on the sort of Green New bullshit, where the previous administration sort of pumped in about $1 trillion worth of spending on that front, and about 700 odd have already been sort of committed because there's contracts and all this that has actually happened. He's only been able to freeze the last 300. Now, I'm hoping that even though people would say, I know what most people would say, that 300 should go back to Treasury and not increase the debt. But I think that's wrong. The problem is the US has a long-term debt trajectory, and shelving 300 billion into Treasury isn't going to fix the debt problem of the United States. You would have to cut deep into the actual public system. And not only cut deep into the public system, you would also have to take a lot of the benefits away. That's not a practical thing that any president can do. One, because you would need the support of Congress and the Senate, and he wouldn't get that at all. So that's not going to happen. So people need to, I know there are people out there that think that Trump is going to cut severely a lot of this, like Malay did in Argentina. But Trump doesn't have the same authority that Malay has. Malay has the support, large parts of the people that he actually supported in the early stages of his campaigning were to get them into their own parliament, their own sort of system in Argentina. And by getting people in there who supported him directly, he was able to make these more rapid reforms. So remember, Congress actually writes the laws. You could have a presidential edict, but Congress could pass a law nullifying any presidential edicts. Just keep that in mind. So, hello, Nika. So while Congress has that, it's a very different animal than what the Argentinian system, where Malay could actually do a lot of rapid reforms. Trump doesn't have that, and he knows that to a large extent, and that's why he's actually done the presidential sort of, you could say, stop type, where he's frozen all spending outside the normal budget. What is a normal budget? The Congress passes a budget. The Senate reviews it and makes recommendations to amend it in any way, one way or another, and then the president can either reject it, approve it. The two houses can come together to override the president, in a sense, on a lot of these things. So there's a lot of negotiations, especially if you don't have the majority. He has the majority in this case, so that helps him. But at the same time, they have constituencies that they need to keep happy. And so it's going to be interesting how it's going to play out on the budgetary side. I would hope he takes that 300 billion, doesn't give it back to Treasury at all, and actually puts it into productivity enabling programs. There's three things that I would do with that money. One thing is I would increase the pipeline distribution network to be able to move energy around. That means fossil fuels, oil and gas, to move it around in order to, because if he's going to bring a lot of industry back, he needs to increase the actual pipelines to efficiently move the oil and gas around, because if you're moving it by trucks, there's going to be, that adds a cost. If you're transporting it with ships, like you have to basically take the LNG, cryogenically store it on those vessels and then putting it back into the actual system, there's a whole laborious process. This all adds to cost. If you can just push it around through pipelines, it actually reduces the cost of energy utilization in the system. And as long as you can bring down the cost of energy, you can bring down the cost of producing goods and services. That actually productivity gain, plus adding to that what we call the fourth industrial revolution, new automation, ways of robotics, ways of actually manufacturing things through these sort of printing machines where they can actually print layers and layers of different material, so they can create different types of material. There are compounds that can be added. It's called additive manufacturing, the actual name. That's why, because you can add things. And this additive manufacturing, which is the fourth industrial revolution, you can produce a whole lot of components cheaper, which have got also a number of different properties. And you can use, for instance, simulation software, and sometimes now even AI-driven simulation software, to basically produce component to work out the dynamics of how that component will work. Give you an example. There's a company recently, what was it called again? I forget it. It starts with an A. It's a military industrial complex company. It's a new one, but it's actually growing rapidly. Let me try and find it. Let's see. What they call affordable seekers. Let's see if it's. Oh, it's the Raytheon one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So this is a company that uses additive manufacturing, so they can actually produce the components for the cruise missiles, and they also use simulation software with AIs to produce a lot of the components and to simulate how these would perform. They've got 3 different varieties that they've actually developed, but the cost of R&D is down to 1%. Typically, it's about 15%. So additive manufacturing is actually, and simulation software, to be able to, rather than build test kits and test them over and over again, they're able to basically do a lot of the work, basically what is called digital twins. People may have not heard that term. We use it in mapping in my field. We talk about digital twins, how we replicate a digital with features, spatial features, a digital form of the real world. So we can actually, let's say, use in a building, you want to do a survey, you can actually send a robot through the building, which will use laser light and actually survey and build the whole an image of the way it is in terms of we can replicate that and create a digital version of that. That's called a digital twin. So they're doing something similar in additive manufacturing. So they can actually create a digital twin, a digital form, test it, validate it, simulate it, use the AI to assess things. And I mean, there are weaknesses with AI. I'll give you an example. With AI, for instance, if you were to give it a picture, but you were to actually use a lot of pixelized features within the image that were similar, and I put a dog and a cat, the AI couldn't tell the difference. It would say there are 2 cats there, even though you can see there's a dog. You know, this is the problem with AI, is that they don't view the world the way we view it. In a sense, we view it in the sort of forms and the features. There are specific ear types. We see like these. How can I put it? We bring together a whole lot of components, features that actually create that animal, the way it looks. And we can distinguish from those features, a tail is a specific shape and whatever else, and discern it and say, yeah, that's that. Where an AI is looking at too much detail, and with it, too much detail, when a lot of similarities, it ends up getting confused. We find that in mapping when we're trying to, with vegetation, trying to bloody teach the damn thing to understand the differences, and it gets confused and we have to correct it all the time. So it's a work in progress, so to speak. So not going to take over the university time soon, so you don't have to worry. But these are the sort of things that that are starting to develop on that front, on the industrial front. But in order to enable these things, you've got to have cheap energy. Even, the demented, demonic Bill Gates, even he understands that he needs nuclear power to run his data centers, because he just can't do it any other way. So the reality is that the US needs to use some of that money, that 300 billion. I would be using it. 1, get the energy around. 2, get fast rail. I mean, Europe's had, and Japan and even China now, high-speed rail. The US doesn't have high-speed rail. He should be building a high-speed rail network to move goods around the country and people around the country fast, because that's going to increase the productivity, and it's going to lower the cost of actually the transport cost within the country. That lifts up productivity, and that increases your GDP. Okay, so both those increase your GDP. The other thing is, because we're a digital society nowadays, that is another layer, a service layer that's actually so important with every activity that we do in the economy. The US is behind many other countries in, optical fibre technology. So not enough optical fibre laid down around the country to be able to move a lot of digital information from one part of the country to the other. And even from data, to be able to utilise the data centres. So if I'm basically in Texas somewhere, in a smaller town, and I want to use that data centre to use the AI to test certain things, like a digital twin, to be able to analyse it and stuff like that, to be able to enhance my productivity as a business and as an American business, a small business, I need good telecommunication infrastructure. So if he did those three things, that would go a long way in actually increasing the level of efficiency, productivity, and with cheaper energy, the three combos, that would also increase the overall growth pathway of the GDP. Because the US has got no hope due to the demographics, due to a lot of the way contractually it's sort of tied in to certain benefits and stuff like that. It's got no way of being able to deal with the debt burden in its economy unless it can lift, change the macro picture, the macroeconomic picture. So the macroeconomic picture is basically these three reforms that would be required to basically propel the country into greater productivity and increase the GDP. That's how you lower the debt to GDP. So the debt won't change in size, may even increase slightly. But if you can propel and grow the economy faster than the debt, then the debt to GDP actually starts shrinking over time. And the other thing that I would do is, because banking is a very parasitic part of the economy, which has grown far too much, I would start putting certain levies on that banking system. And that money coming from the banking system, those levies, I would direct them to the debt. Just to the debt, nothing else. It would be directed to that, and that would help bring down over time faster the debt to GDP, but also it would shrink the money supply. Shrinking the money supply would mean that would grow the middle classes over time. Long term, as a macroeconomic reform, it would grow the middle classes, and it would mean the middle classes would have far more purchasing power. And the general inflation, including housing inflation, would come down over time, which means the wealthy people would become less capital rich as that happens, as the money supply shrinks, because really it helps them, And by reducing that money supply over time, you end up with a system that pretty much would lower the cost burden on the population, in terms of being able to access things, so that their living standards would grow as a consequence. And so they would be able to support domestic production as well that was happening in the economy. So it's a sort of a virtuous circle that happens out of it. And we saw it after the Second World War, where Harry Truman brought in policies, this is nothing new, to lower the money supply, reduce the banking sector as a proportion of GDP, and also invested heavily, because already they'd invested heavily in in the hydrocarbons, in transportation and telecommunications. See, the pattern is similar? And this really propelled the US economy through the 50s and 60s into the golden years, as they were called, of capitalism. And that happened because you actually reduced the money supply, and the purchasing power of the average worker was much higher. That's how they transitioned a lot of the average people into the middle classes and improve their living standards dramatically. This isn't nothing new. This can happen. The problem is, a lot of this knowledge has been lost. People are not taught real history. They're taught false history or gender diverse or whatever else bullshit that they teach nowadays. I'm 58. So I've been out of the education system quite some time, but I do hear from others, like family members that have kids at school, and some of the stuff that kids are taught. You can't even call a kid a fat kid anymore. And what do you call them? You just don't call them anything because they won't even give you a word. That's how ridiculous it's become. So, yeah, it's a crazy system. Yes. Anyway, hello, hello. How are you as well? Ah, what are Trump's view, Alexander? Is it keen? Is it interest to keep him as president of Serbia? I don't know what his view are. I don't think Trump has really elaborated on his relationships with other leaders yet. It's very unclear what his foreign policy. From what I can understand, his current foreign policy is going to be more focused on trade. What can I get out of trade agreements with other countries? So that's he's going to be his biggest focus. Avoiding conflicts with major powers will be his second thing. And his third thing will be to do a lot of deals, like specific deals with different countries, trade deals. So these are going to be the three focuses. I don't think he really gives a shit about the leaders of the countries that he's dealing with. He just wants to get the best deal for America. And in particular, he's going to not focus on countries that have got, like, America's already got a surplus. I'll give you an example. America's got a surplus with Serbia. It's got a surplus with Greece. It's got a surplus with most of the Balkans. It's got a surplus with a number of countries around the world. He's not going to focus on those countries. For him, they're irrelevant. They've got a surplus. There's nothing that, they don't have a trade imbalance with those countries. But he does with Germany. He does with China. He does with Japan. He does with certain countries in the world. That's where he's going to focus mostly. So you've got to understand that will be the key motivation, the key focus of the Trump administration will be on that type of trade with specific countries that have a trade surplus and have had a trade surplus for a very long time with the US. So that's where he will focus. And, people like countries like Serbia, Greece, whatever, are less relevant to him. Now, these countries still may be relevant, but in terms of the sort of geopolitics of what's happening in those countries or in those regions where they find themselves, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. And it's don't expect, how can I put it? Don't expect Trump to take any to be proactive in any way. He'll be more reactive, like past presidents have been. So he'll be more reactive towards, if certain people approach the world in a revisionist way and it sort of goes against the US interests in that region, he'll stomp on them in the sort of way. So expect that. It's the reason why a lot of countries are basically keeping quiet. Have you noticed? Nobody's actually saying anything. They're being very quiet, very polite to Trump, trying to soften Trump in regards to themselves, and not saying much. They're being really, even the Turks, who traditionally have this ramping up of anti-Americanism, which they've had for a while, even they have lowered that level quite a bit and saying less because they realise that, they know what happened to Iran. The country was nearly crippled with sanctions. And even the Iranians have quietened down, have you noticed? Even the Qataris have quietened down but the way Trump operates, he says, I'm not going to send in troops. I'm not going to waste anything. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to destroy your economy. I'm going to make it impossible for you to trade, to do anything. And I will collapse your economy to such a level, your own people will eliminate you. And that's how his approach is. It's more like Ronald Reagan did to the Soviets, where he really started ramping up the pressure on the Soviets to try and undermine and weaken their economic capacity to respond to US pressure. He's very much in that sort of style of president. So he's less of a style of trying to, negotiate and all that. He's not interested in negotiation, and neither was Ronald Reagan, unless the other party was willing to talk. So he let the other party come to him rather than him going to them. See the difference, the dynamics? I don't really care. If you want a deal, come and see me. That puts the other party in a weak spot. The Russians have realised that. That's why they're saying we're not interested. And he's sort of ramping up and saying, you're not interested? Okay, I'm not going to basically make any deal on that until you're interested. So potentially that means that the Ukrainian war could continue, potentially. It's very unclear yet. That would be a break with his own support base. And so he's playing it very quiet as well. He's not saying too much on that front as well. And the reason for that is because he realizes, America may be a very powerful nation, but it doesn't have godlike powers to impose. And if you go back to the 80s, 90s, and whatever, yes, they were far more powerful. They had less debt, a much stronger military-industrial complex, and all that. The US doesn't have that anymore, and they know it themselves. They may hide it, but deep down they know that they've lost ground quite a bit. Also, their own ability to affect and control other economies has been reduced because a lot of these countries that are adversarial countries have left the SWIFT, so they're not part of it anymore. So Russia has, Iran has, a lot of these countries have, so that you don't have the same mechanism anymore to be able to sanction them, because the not being in the SWIFT, that means the Western financial trading system, it's much harder to sanction a country because they're not dollar-based anymore, in a sense. They're shifting away from the dollar base. And so that gives those countries a bit more freedom. But and that's why Trump would be forced to sanction third parties to try and get to them, in a sense, which is much harder in some cases than most people think. And it's the reason why it was very hard to be able to sanction Russia effectively, or many other countries. They lost that advantage when they weaponized the dollar openly. Before they used it directing against one single country. When they started, being a bit more adventurous under the Biden administration and attacking everyone, they really undermined their position in that regard. But I would say, I wouldn't worry. The Serbian leader's got nothing to worry, and Serbia has really got nothing to worry. It's a low priority on Trump's horizon, so to speak, and even the Albanian issue is less of an issue for him in that regard compared to the Democrats, which is a bigger issue because they're always interested in trying to undermine Russia within the Balkans. So where Trump's less interested in that, honestly. So he doesn't see the same value, in a sense. So probably under his administration, Serbia's got less to worry about. But China probably has more to worry about, in a sense. Anyway, how are you, mate? Regard. Crypto-friendly president. Yes, he is a crypto-friendly president in that regard. Yes, he is. But time will tell, because there are groups and people associated with Trump, part of tech billionaires and a few other people, financiers as well, that are not very, that want to push the digital currency. as well. So, and I don't trust Vance either. I think Vance is, I've never trusted him. Let's put it that way. I think that looking at he comes across that he's interested in the working class and stuff like that. But then when he was running that in the Appalachians, that company which starts with an A, I can't remember it. He was the working conditions were very poor for the people that were working there, and then he got pretty much a lot of them. There was some sort of industrial action against him, and they pretty much removed most of that staff and replaced it with immigrant people that were willing to do all sorts of work under whatever conditions. So, he promotes himself as America first and, pro working class Americans and all that. But his past actions and some of the people, like there was one ex-CEO who was part of what was it? One of the fake meat companies. I can't remember which one it was. It's a while since I've read the stuff, and so we got to be very careful. Look, as an Orthodox Christian, I tend to approach things that we're instructed by our priests to vote the lesser of two evils. I don't believe that Trump is, the saviour. Only Christ is the saviour. He's an imperfect person, no different than any of the rest of us. While I do believe that he has a bit of an ego problem as well, too much pride, which does harm him and does compromise him because people use that against him and trick him and deceive him, and that's how they befriend him, by playing on his vanity and pride, which isn't a good thing. But on the other hand, I think he does care far more than most other politicians, your regular politicians. But he's a flawed man, like most of us are flawed. I just hope, for the sake of the Americans, that he basically tries to put more of becomes a bit more humble and tries to put more. You could say he's himself in the hands of God rather than in the hands of many of the men that he has around him, which I don't believe all of them have his best interest or the country's best interest at heart. The hanger-oners, as I call them, people, when they see the things drift in another direction, jump on that bandwagon. Elon is a double-edged sword. I don't trust him, to be honest. I think he does have some belief systems which are similar to us, but he also has certain others because he's not a man of faith. Even though he sort of professes that he respects people which have faith, he doesn't, and in that way, he does have connections in the past to people who are in transhumanism and many of these sort of groups, which is part of the globalist elites. He seems to have moved away from that to some extent. How much is unclear. He was influenced by those, what I call the dark forces. So how much he's come closer to the light is very hard to say. So I've always got a question mark over his head, like I have with Vance and a number of others that are close to Trump. So we always should put ourselves, the true person that we can, the only person we should completely put our faith in 100% is God, okay, is what I'm trying to say, not man. Men are flawed, especially in today's world, very flawed. So we need to be very careful of trying to understand this sort of thing. So don't expect a paradise on earth. That's an impossibility. That's a delusional, delusion that a lot of people have harboured. These utopians of the past who ended up just killing a lot of people, trying to implement their ultimate paradise. And the AI paradise or whatever else is the modern incarnation of that will end up in a very similar way. I do have concerns that Trump is very close to certain industrialists which are close to big pharma in terms of some of they're pushing this bullshit of the mRNA technology for cancer treatments and all that. Well, they used that in oncology more than a decade ago, and it failed. Now they're coming across, we've fixed the problems. Bullshit. I did, if you look at on my other channel, on the C19, the COVID-19 sort of videos, I did a very early one which covers all the side effects of the Jabba the Hutt mRNA in regards to oncology, to show quite clearly the basis that I was coming from, that this technology is very problematic. So anyway, that's not to be, that's, people can go and check that video to get that information. But this is the sort of problems that we face in terms of a political system which is not pro-human or pro-God in a sense. While it has elements, there is elements of misanthropy and anti-God as well in it. So, as I said, we voted. If people voted for Trump, they voted for the lesser of two evils. That doesn't mean that evil doesn't exist in this world and there aren't these forces that are constantly trying to tempt, constantly trying to alter the way things go. So just keep that in mind. Okay, thanks. Who can then remove Serbian lunatic president? EU protesting Serbia last 2 months already. Well, only the Serbian people can. In the end, it's the Serbian people that will remove these people. We have the same problem in Greece. I mean, I live in Australia, but I'm a Greek citizen as well. I'm a dual national, both a Greek and an Australian patriot. But I can tell you one thing, over there, the last elections, the Conservatives, who have also gone woke, their popularity dropped to 28%, and 28% as a percentage, you have to think, only less than 50% of the population voted. So 49% nearly. And they got 28% of that, and they were the biggest party. So there's well over 50% of the population that are looking for an alternative. The problem currently is that no real genuine alternative. Greeks won't vote for the extreme. They're not like the Germans. They just won't. They won't vote. There's far left and far right parties, populist parties. They're not getting any traction. What you need is a centrist party which breaks away from that mold. That would get a lot of votes, and I know that from history. If I go back to the night, because it's due to the Orthodox faith. We view, due to the Orthodox faith, we view basically these extreme political forms as very demonic. We reject them because we consider them Luciferian, which end up in a lot of bloodshed. That's why we don't fall for that. It's because of our Orthodox faith. We reject their violence, their violent, characteristics, which is what they have, very misanthropic characteristics. So it's much harder for those type of extreme left, extreme right to take power in Greece as populists or any populist in that regard. But if you've got a centrist political party with sensible policies and is mildly populist, on a number of issues that, like immigration concerns the Greeks, things about, woke concerns a lot of these Greeks. These sort of they want normality back. If you can provide them with a centrist alternative, a patriotic centre. I've actually said that if somebody was to establish a patriotic centre party, they would probably win in Greece for that simple reason. So the characteristics of the culture, the values that people have in different countries will manifest in different ways, the opposition. And that's why currently and Serbia is probably the same. Most Serbians are sick and tired of conflict and bloodshed. They basically want a sensible centre, but nothing exists at the moment. If you get a sensible centre that emerges, yes, things could change dramatically in that regard. But unfortunately, at the moment, there is nothing there. And that's why it's probably going to take Serbia, Greece, countries like that, probably another decade before they find an alternative, or the major centrist parties switch their agenda. Maybe influenced by the Trump administration over time, possibly. Already I've seen a lot of politicians in the centre doing backflips on a lot of the LGBT and a lot of other agendas currently in Greece. So there is hope for the centre. They may reform themselves out of fear than anything else. We'll see what happens. It's hard to say. It's a weird sort of situation that way. Bullet, how are you, mate? Do you think that there'll be a war with Iran? Hard to say. I don't think. I think if you take a look at Trump's action, he basically put a lot of, let's say, he made it clear to the Israelis that he's not interested in another Middle Eastern war. He's made that very clear in that regard. So, no, unless Iran does something really stupid, and Iran has actually pulled their horns in and sort of reduced their tension they've actually already lost their foothold in Lebanon and Syria. They potentially could lose it in Iraq. There's a lot of pressure being put on by the administration, even this administration, on the Iraqi government to not allow the Iranians through anymore. So there's the potential there where he'll use a different approach with Iran. He's going to do a deal with them, That's what I suspect rather than a war. But it will be a deal which will be difficult for the mullahs in Iran to agree to. So could there be conflict in the future? Possibly. But at this stage, unlikely. So there'll be probably a few years of some pressure, maybe some sanctions, some low-grade diplomacy to test the waters to see whether they can come up with a deal that he can sell to his supporters. So it'll be interesting to see, but it's very unclear at the moment because we're in the early days of the Trump administration, so it's still unclear what's going to happen on that front. It could go either way. I think that he wants a deal more than war on the Iranian issue, but if he doesn't get a deal, he may unleash the Israelis on the Iranians together, so potentially. So it's very unclear at this stage what will happen. But he's definitely forced some peace on pretty much most of the sides. So he's forced some peace on. He's forced the Qataris to pull their horns in and stop supporting some of these groups. He's forced Hamas into a big compromise. That doesn't mean they're going to go away, but he's made it quite clear that he'll obliterate them if they disagree with him, and pretty much they know that he would. See, that's the difference with Trump and many. He doesn't just say he'll do it. He'll definitely do it in that regard. And they know that he will do it because due to his ego, due to his pride, due to his personality, he doesn't want to lose. He goes out of his way to win. It's a psychological thing, and sometimes he's actually even harmed himself in business deals trying to win something better. So it's a personality flaw that he has, and these countries are not stupid. They've got their own intelligence, their own people that analyse these leaders and say, what is he likely to do? He's likely to crush us just to make a point. Okay, let's just cool things down with him. And that's what they do, because they realise, because there's always, he's only going to be in there for 4 years. After that, we can go back to our old approach. So they just want to survive the 4 years, if you understand what I get. So yes, he'll quieten down things in the Middle East and probably get some deals, some improvements in the Abraham Accords and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that after he's gone, that things may not revert back to where they were. Very likely. And possibly even worse, because all these countries would have had 4 years to build up again capacity. So, once Trump is gone, in 4 years' time, expect things to really become more explosive in the Middle East again and in a few other parts of the world. But for now, things will quieten down. I don't expect a war, to be honest. Yeah, there's no alternative at this present stage, and it's the same thing. Unfortunately, for a number of countries. Yeah, look, yeah, things have really gone off the rails at the moment in Serbia. The sort of leadership there. But what can you do? Okay. Yep, that's fine. I mean, none of us have to agree. I just think that none of these players, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Qatar, um, the Emiratis, the Saudis, a lot of these, even the Turks to some extent, a lot of these people are going to cool things down a bit. I mean, if you took a look, there was a special ambassador for the Kurds from Syria. They don't even have a country yet. At the inauguration of Trump. That's a clear message to Erdogan. If you continue causing problems, I'm going to start causing problems to you. So what I'm saying is that he has the capacity to quieten things down. That doesn't mean he's going to fix the problems in those countries. But under his presidency, there's not going to be as much bloodshed. But the underlying animosities, the underlying problems that exist in regions, the underlying friction and conflict and all that, that's not going away at all. It'll come back and possibly come back with a bigger vengeance than before after Trump, is what I'm trying to say is, but you could disagree. You may believe that there will be a war with Iran. I don't think so. Iran has got a big population. It's a massive population. So we're talking about 80, 90 million compared to, that's bigger than Germany. That's not a country you could start an easy war with, an attrition war. They can put more people in the field. High technology can do so much, but numbers count. And Saddam Hussein learnt that lesson when he fought the Iranians in a much earlier era. It ended up a bloody warfare. And even though he had the support of all the Arab countries, the Emiratis, the Saudis, they were all funding him, shitloads. The Americans were funding him. Everybody was funding him with shitloads of money, weapons and everything else. He still couldn't win. So, and there's your problem with the Iranians. So I think Trump's more realistic, and he understands that Iran isn't an easy opponent. And now that it's got the backing of both Russia and China, and has also greater capability. I mean, they have the capability of producing far more advanced weapons and drones and many other things compared to, and also they're getting a lot of components. All those drones, their little motors, they're all built in China. So the Americans know that. They're quite clear. Without those components, the Iranians couldn't build a lot of their drones. So their capacity to manufacture, and now they've got a market because they sell in the Ukraine and elsewhere. So for them, it's been, war has been very profitable for the Iranians as well. Not only the Russians and the Chinese through the back door via the Central Asian corridor, which they've been pushing a lot of stuff. The Americans know about it. They've talked about it. Old Blinky, Mr. Blink, as I call him, the old Secretary of State, Blinken. I call him Blinky. Old Blinky, you was well aware of that. But the reality is that he couldn't do much about it because he would piss off a lot of Central Asian republics, which they're trying to woo towards the West. Got it? And if you piss them off, then, that whole strategy of knifing Russia's underbelly, as they call it, part of the Brzezinski doctrine of encirclement of Russia, won't work. So they have to be a bit more careful and flexible, where the previous administration will just really off the rails. I mean, America's got a lot of problems. He's in a declining mode. It's got a lot of underlying issues. And these people thought that they were back in 1944, the way they were behaving on the international scene. Complete and utter derangement in their logic. They don't have millions of standing armies. What do they have? About 300,000 troops, and about 30% of that is non-operational. And that's not me saying it. Remember, when you've got about 300 odd, you halve that because the other one's support. So the bayonets, the people that can actually do the war is about 150 odd to 160 odd, or maybe up to 180, depending who you ask. I haven't checked the recent numbers to be able to tell you exactly. Take out of that 30% of the overall, which is about 15% in that regard. So you're looking at 20 odd. You've got in the 50 odd, 100 odd in the US theatre. Take about 20. You're left with about 50 odd. It's about 30, I think, in Europe, and 20 in the close to in Guam, parts of in Japan, and a few in the Philippines, and a few other places like that. Mostly less army, more Marines in those sort of areas, in forward deployed areas. I mean, they were able to increase slightly the numbers in Europe to 50,000, but that's all they could actually deploy in Europe, 50,000. Yes, they have advanced kit, but, still, if you have to confront a military of 500,000, like 1 million, like currently Russia has about well over 750,000 troops. And remember, there only about a third of those are support, which is like 500,000 are actually actual bayonet people that can fight. You got a 10-to-1. All the technology is not going to be able to stop that in a sense. The only reason why Russia can't deploy that in an effective way is economics. They just don't have a big enough economy to support such activity. They can do limited battles within a small territorial region, in a small region. To project power beyond that region is very hard unless you've got massive logistics, an economy that can provide sufficient funding for that. The Second World War nearly bankrupted America in the end. They grew their, even worse than what it is now, their debt to GDP. And they had to beg people to buy US bonds of their citizens as a patriotic thing. So money is needed to conduct war. It's just a reality. So it's not having the personnel. But Russia has the capacity of defending itself, is what I'm saying, but not really projecting power, even though they have better numbers. So numbers aren't everything. Economics does come into it all the time. So it's always a much more complex picture. But as far as the Middle East goes, I believe that the big push is to dampen things down because there's a lot of pipelines and a lot of energy that needs to be moved around to support Europe. And so there is pressure to decouple from Russia and the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East to be the key supplier for Europe and North America with additional exports in order to reduce the BRICS influence on Europe is the main thinking in the US at the moment. The whole idea is they see the BRICS as sort of the Chinese Trojan horse, as they would call it, to dominate the global economy. And so what they're trying to do is decouple from that dependency Europe. And it's the reason why Trump's so interested in the rare earth minerals in Greenland. It's not only, for security, that's the pretext, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is, what do you think Elon Musk is so interested in Greenland as well? That's a revisionist agenda, but they're really interested in the resources there because there's been a lot of, let's say, past activities for the last 25 years, which have actually indicated through geological surveys that there is a lot of rare earths there. And since the Chinese have taken control of a lot of regions around the world of those things, it means that the US needs to find new resources. There's a lot of activity in Australia, Western Australia. So I would say, Australia's getting to the point in the rare earths, so rare earths, lithium, and that sort of stuff. If you're an investor, this is not investment. This is my opinion. This is not investment advice. But if you're an investor, I would be really looking at the small cap companies that are operating in Western Australia that are involved in lithium and a number of rare earths, which they're producing because they're going to be a massive supply for the US in particular. And the US is also putting restrictions on chip and material use by the different allies. So they'll be part of a new supply chain that's being developed. So there'll be very much, so even the chip manufacturers they're going to be putting quotas on who can buy how many. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, which means that certain countries may have restrictions in importation restrictions on the amount of chips they can purchase from the US or from certain other countries. So there is pressure on the Dutch companies that produce a lot of the actual lithography machines for where they export some of those. So that's interesting as well. There's a sort of a long-term policy to decouple from the Chinese supply chain as well. So there's a lot of things happening at the same time. So it's a very complex picture. How it'll end up looking like in 10, 20 years, very hard to say, but it could end up, a fragmented world where you've got large parts of Africa, Southeast Asia and Central Asia, and including Russia, with China, sort of one block, and the Americas. Expect Brazil to leave the BRICS at some point. The Americans will either overthrow the government or eliminate some of the people. They're not going to tolerate in the Western Hemisphere anybody being part of the non-US alliance. So yes, so expect something dramatic there to happen in Brazil at some point. And then you'll have Europe, most of Europe, right up to the borders of what we call today's Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, and all the rest, together with the Americas and Northeast Asia, which is Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, that sort of area, will be part of the US supply chain. So you'll end up with a Chinese supply chain and a US supply chain. That's where the world is breaking into two big imperiums, what is happening at the moment. So, I mean, whether that's going to succeed exactly as they intend, that's a different story altogether. I'm just telling you what their intentions are and what potentially this Trump era could bring forward in the future. Yours is, 666 for Trump. Yes. Have you seen basically the priest that actually he selected? I'm going, really? Well, that's the type of church you go to? With some demonic feminist priest? God almighty. I was quite shocked. So Les, how do you feel about Trump AI infrastructure and the shady giant tech companies, Oracle tracking 5 billion users? Well, Trump's got no idea about these sort of things. Vance does, because he's been very close to the tech billionaires and to a lot of the IT top IT companies. Vance is going to be the next president, and Vance is going to bring in the digital currency and the AI dominance. It's going to be sold as the patriotic AI infrastructure against China. So China's going to be the boogeyman for the elites in America to push their dominance. And the reality is, look, as an Orthodox Christian, I always are reminded from what my priest used to say: technology is not evil; it's humans that either use it in an evil way or a good way. See the difference? So, unfortunately, some of the people around him I would consider evil. And have the potential of, using it to try and control the population, and they're becoming far more successful. Uh, Um, no, nothing. It's not part of Trump's agenda, but it definitely will become part of Vance's agenda. Okay, you can you can take that to the bank when Vance comes into power, which he will come into power because of the MAGA pushing him into power. He will usher in a lot of this agenda. Not Trump. He's opposed to it. The problem is he's being played again. Look, Trump is a real estate guy. He's great at doing that sort of stuff. He does love his country and his people. He's got a big ego, so he's got a lot of faults as a human, which they exploit and pander to. Yes, Donald, you're a great president, and all this. That stokes his ego and his pride. His pride is the thing that is his problem. It's one of the biggest sins, being prideful. But that is what undermines the Donald Trump, and will undermine him in the long run. But the people, a number of people, characters around him, yeah, I do have a lot of concerns about them because I look at their history and their associations with some of these tech billionaires. And what do you think? Mark Zuckerberg has basically reformed himself. Bullshit. He's a snake. He'll just he's just switched hats. He's put the MAGA hat on because that works for him at the moment. That's all it is. So I wouldn't trust that person as far as I could throw him in. And Larry from Oracle, definitely not. He's even a worse snake. I'm talking about Agenda 21. Well, that's a group that actually created that. That didn't come from the Trump people. That came from a separate conservative sort of group and all that. So yeah, you've got similar agendas like Agenda 2030 from both conservative groups but they're very similar in some of when you read through some of the context of what they're actually saying very similar things. As I said, I'm not against advanced technology because we deal with it. In mapping, in my field, we deal with it. And it's a great productivity. If you want to maintain living standards and lift them, you need high technology. But there is a difference between high technology, which is used for the people or against the people, and that's where you've got a problem when it comes to the system in the US, in particular in China and countries like that, where it's being used against the population in a number of different ways. So, remember, human systems are imperfect, absolutely imperfect. And I mean, I don't know whether you've studied economics or not. Most people have that do. I usually say some of the dumbest people are the people that actually study economics. They come out even dumber. They have these sort of equilibrium models of economics. Yeah, the last time we had a sort of an equilibrium model was when we had a barter economy. A real barter economy. That means people were just producing things, and on the Assyrians and the Sumerians on tablets would mark down so many sheep, so many goats, so much bundles of hay, or so many whatever measurement of grains, or this grain or that grain, or barley or whatever. That was the last time we had what I call a closed system. A closed system has fixed in terms of assets and goods and services. It's pretty much, and you can exchange them. They have a certain value depending on the supply and demand in the system. The moment you put a currency in, you no longer you have an open system. Not a closed system, but an open system. And an open system, it is prone to currency manipulation. You can take gold and reduce the amount of gold content. It's no different than money printing today. It's the same thing. They did it. They debased currency back then and created a crisis. You will always generate, because people will overinflate. So when you can manipulate currency, you can overinflate or deflate any economy and create different types of crises. So you create a much more unstable, while you get the ease of exchange having a currency, but you have the risk of human manipulation of the currency, which opens up the system, which means now you have the problem of affecting the level of money supply and the level of inflation, so and also how both the macro and macroeconomics unfolds within an economy. So that's the difference between, and so we have to get out of our mind these isms. All these isms are false isms. We're in a fallen, corrupted world in a sense. No isms work. All you can do is try to basically reduce the amount of, nastiness in the system, evilness in the system, is what we can fight against and try and, at least for the average person, get a better deal in a sense. You cannot create paradise on earth. You can't create, the Russians manipulated their currency. The Chinese manipulated their currency. Everybody manipulates their currency because political leaders find it easy to do that rather than the sort of changes that they need to do sometimes, which are much harder, and it's hard to bring the population along with those sort of things. So, yeah. Robots are already manufactured. It's just a matter of time when it's going to be in the public market. The future is going to be weird. Look, obviously for people in this period, I mean, it's the same thing. If you go back and look at an image of New York before cars emerged, this is back in the 1920s. You can look at the whole of New York. You see all these horse and carts around the planet, mostly carts, and mostly even the transportation system was these little the early forms. In many cases, they were open. Some of them were covered in terms of trams, but these trams were being pulled by horses. And then within a couple of years, 2 odd years, I think it was, or whatever, the picture was completely different. It was just full of cars. There was 1 or 2 horses and carts left. That has happened before, where the entire transport system completely changed in New York within a small amount of time. So that's obviously, for those people, that would have been really weird as well. That happened so dramatic and sort of stuff like that. But as I pointed earlier about AI and stuff like that, how dumb it is and all that, and you need to improve the algorithms and recode things and change parameters and try to restrict it. The more you restrict it, the more you control it. The more you let it try to do a thing like general AI on its own and all that, you end up with gibberish. It doesn't work. Obviously, some of these tech billionaires will say, "Oh, we'll fix the problem. We'll come up with solutions and all that." It's a bit like trying to work out where an electron is in quantum mechanics. That's how difficult it is. These guys don't realise. And that's why if you take a look, a lot of these tech billionaires, what are they doing? They're taking their AIs and just putting more instructions in. What do you think we're doing in mapping? we're putting more instructions as we're instructing and clarifying things continuously so the AI can understand, because we use it on vegetation layer. So you get satellite images to compare between the vegetation layers, the previous, because you got satellites picking up the different frequencies, and they will tell you what type of vegetation it is. And then you can use that to compare with the previous year to see what changes in growth, whether you've got a certain type of plant that's actually grown. And that can be used for forestry companies, can be used for environmental conservation, land management, all sorts of purposes. But humans can do that much better. AI constantly basically mucks it up, constantly. So I wouldn't really worry. What these will be is, these will be, see, up until now we've got robotics in factories which have got all these arm pieces clipping things together and whatever. But over time, where these robots have become in a way where they can actually manipulate things in a much more a different way, a much flexible way compared to past robotic systems. So that's more what's going to come about. You're not going to have, the taking over of robotics or anything like that. Now, I'm more concerned less about robotics and more concerned about, what these people can control the narratives, can use AIs to manipulate information or to use AIs to spy on people. I'll give you the example, people's mobile phones, at the moment we have, like, for a lot of apps that people use, like Telegram or whatever app, we've got like end-to-end encryption. When you add AI, like a lot of these tech companies are doing, like Apple and all that, turn the AI off. Okay? You have to restrict it to specific applications where you want it to do things. I rather would use it on my computer and restrict it to specific applications to do what I want, but I don't want it to be able to look at my system, so to speak. So we have to be very careful how we use this technology. It's no different than, clicking on, you get cookies. Go into the preferences and say only the essential ones to interact with my browser and yours. And then make sure you clear the cookies as well, that they're not resident in your system. Make sure periodically you check your browser that it's not, there is not embedded stuff. What's active, and I just turn them off or remove them if I consider them not needed, so to speak. We need to be a bit more proactive. But when you have AI, you could have the potential where it could nullify completely end-to-end encryption, because now the AI is actually managing your phone, and your phone now, it's reading everything and feeding it back to who, to Apple Central. And they are then monetizing and also providing it to government and who knows which private individual or whatever. This is the danger of what you said. Do you think we're heading towards technocracy? Yes, we are. Due to people being lazy and wanting convenience, it's being sold as, we'll make your life very easy. And people have been victims of, we will make your life very easy for a long time. Where I, on the other hand, have used virtual private networks. I basically limit a whole lot of things, so turn off a lot of functionality in my browsers in order for things like that. And for certain, when I go to look at certain parts of the web. I actually use specialised browsers as well. I just won't mention them because I don't want it to be recorded. We'll see. I may actually put a post at some stage. But yes, we are moving towards definitely a technocracy where the very wealthy tech billionaires, together with the financial elites, like people that control all the fund managers, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, elements like that, have sort of come together, coalesced into an alliance where they want to control the society far, and pretty much, be the key arbiters of what happens. To a large extent, they have compromised a lot of politicians. Trump has probably thrown a spanner, more because he doesn't like it himself. I don't see him as a white knight. I just see him as a person that is flawed in many regards, is also enabling some of this stuff to happen as well. All this Stargate sort of funding and stuff like that for these tech billionaires is part of that. And Vance is pushing that, and a few other people that are close to Trump. So yeah, it's definitely part of that agenda, and it will be sold to the American people and Westerners, and the people in the Americas as part of the free world. So pretty much your chains will look pretty. So they will offer you chains that look pretty compared to so. The West is more of a soft totalitarianism. You'll have a soft totalitarianism, but you will have totalitarianism, where the East may be a harsher one. You can see in China, it's really ridiculous. You go to certain locations, you have to basically scan. You can't even walk into other parts of the city. It's a bit like, it's crazy, like Hunger Games nearly, where you can't access other parts unless you've got a certain social credit. It's ridiculous. Or you can't even order. You can't use a credit card anymore to order things and stuff like that. So it's become really bad, and forcing people to become very compliant in order to be able to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and keep themselves warm in the winter. So that's where it's really severe. In the West, we've already seen the early stages of it, where banks have we've seen deplatforming of people, but also we've seen the banks restricting access to accounts, online accounts, for people. So you can't actually deposit your money anywhere or have the capacity to be part of the real economy. So we saw that with Farage in the UK and a few other people around the world. So there are those issues, and they are going to get worse in that regard. In this era, in the next 4 years, things will be like what I call on hold. On hold, things won't be happening, but in the background, there'll be a lot of activity. So when Vance gets in, you can expect things to speed up in that regard in 4 years' time. So it doesn't matter who gets in. Pretty much the deep state owns them all to one extent or another. It'll just be a different puppet. The puppet masters will just have their different puppet running the front. You could say being the ad man for them, but outside that, pretty much we are heading in that direction, unfortunately. And we shouldn't blame technology. That's a neo-Luddite approach, which is ridiculous. Technology is not the problem, as we Orthodox Christians would view it. It's whether we allow it to be used in the wrong way, in an evil way. We need to oppose any evil use of this. This stuff can actually, improve our living standards, but at the same time, it can enslave us. So it's a double-edged sword, like anything. Like a knife can kill, but it can also cut a piece of meat. So it's like anything, any technology that we humans have created, because we are the only species created in the image of God that has the ability to create and understand the creation language of mathematics. We have that capability, but we have from the beginning misused it on countless occasions. And so, but the nice thing about it is I've always found that in the end, evil is defeated one way or another. It's good people basically standing up and saying no. Does that mean you potentially could be martyred for that or suffer for that? Yes. I'm prepared to do that. I don't know whether you are. So I'll leave that to yourself. But we're definitely growing and moving in that sort of direction. Now, on the general front about the economy of the West, Europe has been deindustrialized to a large extent and weakened substantially to be more amenable and more controllable by the US. That's what's really happening, let's be honest about it. And the Trump administration is very much Pax Americana, which means American dominance in that regard. So, yeah, I find very hard to understand how a lot of conservatives, popularists in Europe are such big fans of Trump, when at the same time his policies are going to potentially be very deleterious and damaging to their economies. But on the other hand, on the political front, on the social front, they're probably going to be beneficial. So, as I said, like with everything, there's a double-edged sword with anything. So he's trying to negotiate separately with the different European states. The problem is Germany. The problem is Brussels. They just don't get it. Brussels have lost the plot. They just don't understand that they need to basically relinquish more of their power to the sovereign nations and get the sovereign nations to cooperate, encourage them to cooperate a bit closer to get a better deal as a group. The problem is everybody's trying to do a deal on their own, and who cares about the others? And in the end, they'll all be screwed, because when you go as a smaller entity, like a state, like Germany or Italy or whatever, because Maloney was there as well, hoping to get some of the crumbs off Trump's table, but that's the wrong way. These European politicians should be talking to each other, not to Trump at all, and putting their own economic interests ahead, and sitting down and discussing amongst themselves what sort of deal can they do for the entire European Union. That's one thing. The other thing is that what the Europeans need to do is they need to wake up to themselves. They have underinvested for a very long time. They've used a lot of their wealth that they've created over time to use it in the welfare system and a lot of green nonsense that needs to all go. And they need to redirect some of that funding again to basically creating European-wide. They need to scrap a lot of their programs. A lot of their programs are supporting the old industries. A lot of that has to go. I'm not joking, has to go. And the problem is nobody's willing to do that. Nobody's willing to do that in Europe. They need to take all that out and say, we're going to use €500 billion and we're going to use that to invest it in developing, additive manufacturing, data centers, advanced technology products, our own type of R&D for specific areas of advanced technology to compete with China and the US. Together, they have the economies of scale to do that. Separate on their own, They're finished. Europe is finished. So as far as Europe goes, that's what they need to do, because they need to see, well, the US may be a strategic ally and one may be, but that doesn't mean that they don't have competition. They're not competing in similar markets, in similar areas. They are. And the Europeans need to wake up to themselves that unless they consolidate their numbers and develop some of these advanced technology industries themselves, they won't be able to compete on the world market in the future. They will lose more ground and their living standards will drop in the next 2 to 3 decades to half of what they are today. They will have an economy which will be similar to a developing country, not a developed economy, if the Europeans continue with the current policies in the next 3 decades. So they need to wake up themselves in that regard. Will the next stage of human evolution be transhumanism? No, that's nonsense. There are already DARPA soldiers with brain chips that control swarms of drones with thought, and biotechnology is advancing rapidly too. Yeah, look, there is a program by DARPA to allow, like, they're talking about these wingmen, sort of where you've got a stealth fighter and then you've got a lot of drone that you actually control yourself. There's another company recently that's come up with new drone technologies using additive manufacturing, and they can actually outcompete other bigger companies like I'm going to do a separate video on that down the track and go through all these companies and all that. That's for a later date. But who have developed drones where they can actually manufacture them for for 1 to 2 million. Where the big companies are producing these big friggin' drones, which cost them 15 to 25 million. At that cost, you can understand, there's no way you could create a swarm of drones. So you need some of these, and these are new companies that are emerging. So I'll be bringing them to the attention of US investors because, yes, they're going to be used for the wrong reasons. But if you want to make some money, at least you'll know what to invest in, what's going to be supported by the deep state, and what's going to sort of happen. Because remember, the deep state supported things like Google, all these companies that emerged. They didn't emerge out of nowhere. Neither did the internet. So just keep that in mind. But DARPA, in terms of the brain chips and all that, for simple things, yes. For simple communication, so if you've got using Link 16, which is a communication protocol for ships, it's Links 22, which can. There's different sort of quality of image they can transmit. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the details. That's for another day. But the ability is that you can actually get information from another aircraft or another platform. These are weapons platforms. They're not planes, ships, or tanks. They're weapons platforms. These platforms are interlinked, and you've basically got these drones that you can control and instruct. Why they want to put chips in people's brains is because they can see a target, think it, and send the drone like that faster to the target. You got it? So it's a matter of, the quicker I can respond to my opponent, it's like the first shot that if I can fire before you can fire, I'm going to kill you before you can kill me, if you get my drift. And that's how the technology works. So these sort of brain chips are designed to allow this ability to be able to happen. G'day, Jonathan. So that's what they're actually utilising, this technology. to be able to have this instantaneous type quick response in that regard. Actually controlling a swarm of drones is really hard with our brains. They won't be doing it swarm. The AI will be controlling the swarm of drones. It won't be humans because we can't do that. But what the soldier will be able to do, or what the pilot will be able to do, is instruct. It will be the human in the loop, so to speak. They'll be instructing based on information, because remember, these are dumb systems in a sense. They're not intelligent. It's our will it's our will that projects through them in that regard, to understand that quite clearly. So they can be used to then control via the AI, instructing, hit that target, hit that, or whatever, prioritize that, or whatever. So that's how it's going to be used in that regard. Long term, that's a different thing. It could become much darker than that in that regard. But at this stage, that's the sort of approach. Now, I wouldn't be volunteering as a military person for one of these things. Okay, let's put it that way, at all. And as citizens, I wouldn't be, they'll sell it to citizens. Oh, you can get a chip inserted and you can actually think, and you can actually open up the fridge or open up that, or do a transaction by thinking about it or whatever, as a convenience. Again, our laziness, as I was saying earlier, in that regard, and the potential there for abuse. Like with any technology, there's a potential dual use. Anything can be abused, anything can be evil, can be used for evil or for good. It's not the technology, it's how it's used. And some of these people, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them. Now, in terms of the first part of it, because they're two separate questions, the first part, because I've answered the second part to clarify things, but the first part is the transhuman part. Why don't you think transhumanism is going to be the thing shortly for the year 2050? Man merging with machines. I'm a pacemaker, so I'm basically transhumanist. I'm basically a transhumanist. Well, you're not. That's not the concept of transhumanism. Just let me bring you up to date. Having basically an artificial, like you could call Jonathan here, who's got basically pins and screws in his body, a transhumanist. And no, that's not what a transhumanist is. Having a pacemaker, a device that keeps your heart operating, or having basically, an artificial, an artificial knee, or artificial hips, or stuff like that. That is more, you could say, like cyborg. And I wouldn't actually use cyborg, because to be classified as a cyborg, you have to be mostly machine rather than biology. These are basically artificial, artificial limbs or artificial parts to do a certain function and all that in your body, stuff like that. So, no, that is not what transhumanism is all about. What they mean by transhumanism is a completely different concept. It's basically being able to merge with, you could say, artificial intelligence with, it's a sort of a concept that we can upload ourself into a digital form. That's what the ultimate thing is, to really discard the human, get rid of the human, because it's the human. It's the next stage of evolution, as they call it, that we evolve away from being flesh, which dies, into the immortal digital sort of, realm, in a sense. So we're talking about making humans, in a sense, less biological creatures, but more digital creatures. That's really what the ultimate aim of these people are, because they see that the biology has limitations. They're not interested in basically enhancing. What they're trying to do is they are trying to get immortality, because they don't believe in an afterlife. They don't believe in paradise. They don't believe in God. Most of these people, they believe that once you go, you go. That's it. So they want to take what they believe is just biological. There is no soul, their view, and move the information and personality into a digital form that can live forever is sort of the way, and will enhance the capacity of that. That's the ultimate goal of transhumanism. Obviously, some of this sort of technology can be useful, but a pacemaker, that supports a biological system. You see the difference? So most of those things support a biological system. You don't need, we're talking about what they want to do is they want to be like robots that have the mind of a human. That's the ultimate goal of these people. Okay? So nothing to do with, pacemaker or artificial limbs or stuff like that. Some of that stuff started even before a lot of this thinking happened. So solutions to injuries to a biological tissue that needed to, you couldn't find another way. So no, the two are not the same in that regard, and we shouldn't consider, because they're not talking about putting. It's not part of putting machine components into humans, like having a prosthetic arm, an artificial arm, as an example, that works just like the biological. That's more cyborgian. It's not transhumanism. It's not. That's more. Cyborg is somewhere between transhumanism and the biological, but it's not transhumanism. Transhumanism is basically to liberate oneself from the biological flesh. Ultimately, that's what it is. That's what their goal is. Their goal is, it's not, they don't give a shit about the body. You've got to understand that the body's unimportant, the heart, the lungs, their limbs, and all that. Whether you put a prosthetic piece in, all that does is just makes it more comfortable for you to walk around, or for your heart to function properly, in your case. That's about it. But that doesn't fix. That doesn't fix. That doesn't allow you to live forever or transfer your essence into silicon, because that's what they're talking about, transferring their essence into silicon. That's a completely different mindset. Like humans, like you hear Nolan Ferrari, the crazy gay guy from Israel who's on the World Economic Forum. What's his view? Humans won't exist. Understand? The biological won't exist, is what they're talking about. So transhumanism, this whole thing, in the past it was, it came out of, if you look back, old eugenics, Malthusian and then eugenics, they sort of merged together to some extent. The whole concept of eugenics was to make the sort of perfect human or perfect thing. Then there was an approach of, cloning and being able to transfer that information from one human to another, a clone. Even if you were to do that, that's not transhumanism exactly, if you know what I mean. So it's a very different animal. This is basically when we say merging with a machine, it's our personality is merged with a machine. Okay, there's a big difference between putting something into your body to allow your limbs to work properly, or your heart to function, or if you've got spinal problems to hold it up, and transhumanism. So they're not trying to preserve biology; they're trying to evolve beyond biology. Oh, I see. So it was much different than what I interpreted. Yes, I thought it was something like man merging with machine, with robotic parts, cybernetics enhancing performance. No, it's not any of that sort of thing, So that's cyborg type things. But we've had that, you take a look at humans, from ancient times, prosthetics. You'd cut the bone, you'd cut the leg off, and you'd put a stump. That's a prosthetic. Pirates had stumps. That is basically cyborgian, or you could call it, because it's how you call it, woodborgian. Because you're using wood as a stump. It's the same thing. So it allowed the pirate, oh my laddies, to be able to still fight, having lost one leg, having a stump to be able to walk with one leg and one stump, as an example. That is not transhumanism, so we need to separate the two. So you could basically have the entire body mechanical, and the whole brain, all this being still biological, as an example, if you could maintain it and all that, in a sense, and you would still technically be human, but less, but not purely biological anymore in that regard. But what they are trying to do is but you'd still be mortal, you'd still die in the normal way. You just basically have more machine parts functioning on behalf. And if you lost your mind, you'd be, you'd basically be a cyborg, a mentally disturbed cyborg. But you wouldn't be a transhuman, is what they're talking about. And this is why I believe that transhumanism is impossible, because we don't understand the soul, we don't understand the mind. We do sometimes open ourselves up to via the noetic faculties, to a metaphysical realm. And we sometimes, especially when you're very spiritual, whatever, you can actually, obviously, if you're less Christian, you may interact with the wrong type of, like, demonic, rather than with our Father. So you've got to be careful what you do on that front. But through the noetic faculties, what we call theosis in Eastern Orthodox Christology, is this thing, and you can see it in saints, where there's this like they're glowing, this connection with the divine, and that's something completely different. And you're not going to get that, because you can find creatures like dolphins and that have got very sophisticated brains. In some regards, even more sophisticated than ours, and very, like frontal lobes and stuff like that are really slightly larger and stuff like that. So they can actually analyze things and do things and all that. But what they can't do is create like us. So you can actually put mathematical symbols and put them up in a certain pattern, and then, it just shown for milliseconds and turned off. We can't do it, but chimps can actually hit them extremely accurately. So a lot of species can be very fast at mimicking things really fast. But that doesn't mean that they can create. We're the only ones creating the image of the icon, as I say, the icon of Christ, that has that ability. And what we call the soul is something that comes from God, from the Father via the Son and Holy Spirit to us. And we have part of that divine essence, which is what the soul is, that connection to God. And when we have darker thoughts and behaviors, that lessens in us. And when we have the proper thinking, it grows in us, and it's like a light, because really evil, what it is evil, darkness, and all that is basically, being further away from God. There's no, there's no this diametrically evil and good. No, what there is there's good, and the absence of good is what is evil. See, it's a very different way of viewing things. The absence of God is evil, things like that. The absence, in thermodynamics, when you're looking, the absence of heat, there's no basically cold. What there is the lesser heat makes. So it's the absence of heat. Ask any scientist, they'll tell you that. So it is that, and sort of our Christology sort of conforms with what we observe and what we understand, and the things that have come to pass and have been revealed. So I would not, as a person, I wouldn't get too worried. I'm glad that you have a better understanding. Put your faith in God and always fight evil, because that's all we can do, is to oppose evil in this world. That's all we can do. If things are going to play out in a certain way, they will play out in a certain way. We can talk about them, that's fine. We need to talk amongst ourselves to know of these things, so we can know what we have to oppose and what is a misdirect. Because that's why we should interact with people that think in a similar way, because sometimes we just, and we also have to be very careful about the way we view anything. Remember, everything can be used for See, when you have the proper belief system, you understand that things are not bad. They can either be used for bad reasons or for good reasons. There's your difference. I can use an AI to improve my mapping. That's a good thing, because it actually means that I can make something cheaper. I can provide that information, which allows other people to do their work more productively and get better results, But also, that information could be used in a much more nefarious way as well, misrepresenting stuff in order to push certain narratives or certain policies which are misanthropic. See the difference? And that's why we shouldn't fear technology like modern day Luddites, but we should understand that it has a dual use. And I don't believe that transhumanism is possible. I think it's a pipe dream. It's nonsense. Humans have had a lot of different, eugenics that failed. Once we realised that there was epigenetics, it means that it's an interaction between, it's not nature or nurture, it's both, one interacting on the other. And it's impossible. The variability is so high, it's impossible to accurately determine how that's going to play out. And the last thing you want to be doing is manipulating genes, because Epigenetically, you can interact with the environment and change those over time, in which conforms but doesn't undermine a whole lot of other processes. What they've found is, through animal experiments, once they alter a single gene, see, adaptation and epigenetic adaptation that happens, it doesn't change one gene, it changes multiple things in those interactions. And so you don't get these strange outcomes where you could change one gene, but that gene could affect other genes in a number of ways. Because they haven't been changed appropriately, now things don't function properly. You've got less viability, or you've got certain new diseases, genetic disorders that emerge. Not a good idea. This is why playing God when you don't have enough information, you know, our Creator was much more capable in creating creatures than we are. So when we play with the same sort of divine capacity, because we are created in the image, we can really make a mess of things, So there's our problem with our humans and our arrogance and our pride. And it is our pride that actually causes a lot of these problems. But the ability to move into a silicon realm, yeah, you could probably move thought. You could map a whole lot of the thoughts. So this silicon form may have all your memories, so to speak, but none of your personality, because that's a much more complex thing, and it actually also relates to a soul. So all it will do is it will be, you could say, a repository of your life experiences and a repository of your memories, but it won't be you. Even if they can do this in 100 or 200 years or whatever, or in 1,000 years, but that's all it's going to be. Just a storage place of memories, and but it won't be you. It won't be your personality, because there will be no soul there. Anyway, Lemmy, you're late. Jumping in late, but Trump and his Rain Man are just slurs. But look forward to the entertainment over the next 4 years compared to the Democrats. Yes, true. I mean, it's just another group of the elite with a slightly different agenda. So God, it's 8 o'clock. I better drink this coffee, otherwise I won't be able to sleep at all tonight. Okay. Oops. Get that out of the way. Have my other glasses ready here to change at 9 o'clock. Remind me if I forget. Yeah, so very, very true. Just listen to Campus outside 38 years after reading as a teenager. Wish I was given the Orthodox Bible instead of all those years ago. Perhaps I would have curbed decades of existential anguish, I suspect. Yeah, look, yeah, I used to be an atheist myself, and a long time ago, but I fell for the same bullshit and all that. I think the thing that I could say, 2005, I was starting to lose my faith in atheism at that stage. Part of it was political, seeing the way some of the nefarious forces on this planet were operating. But the thing is, I couldn't tear myself completely away, because I'd been sucked into the scientism of atheism and all that. But at around about 2003, I sort of no longer believed in string theory. I sort of, I never was a strong supporter. I just thought, yeah, maybe it's a plausible, mathematically produced plausible explanation, but I wasn't confident enough for it. And I've been proven right in that regard, that it was bullshit. And then there's the multiverse and all that, that could explain you don't need to have one finely tuned universe by, God. You can basically have multiple universes that just slightly variations, all slight variations. So you can have 99.9999999, which are devoid of any complexity. And then you've got an infinitesimal, very few 0.00 to nearly infinity one that have the right sort of results from all these different variations that are from the brains that actually came off. But in order to have both string theory and multiverse possible, you basically needed supersymmetry. Without supersymmetry, it's not possible. You can't have multiple dimensions more than the 3 space 1 time that we have currently in this, as we understand with this universe. You had to have 11 or more, depending on the model of, and that required supersymmetry. And then you've basically got string theory required supersymmetry as well, for its emergence and all that, mathematically. And these strings could negate the need for God, because they could sort of emerge out of nothingness, more or less, and trigger all this sort of random creation. And then the multiverse could allow that random creation to create variations, so many variations, until you got those very small amount of universes that had better conditions to allow sort of the complexity that we see, in a sense. Well, once this is in 2010, the first experiments, and then 2011, the CERN experiments with the Hadron Collider were coming up, showing that there were not enough muons for the other particles. So there was no symmetry between muons and the other particles. So you go, okay, that's not working. And then with the Higgs field, the Higgs, or the God particle, as some called it, whatever, which produces these. So if you've got the Higgs field that produces all the particles, they're not symmetrical. That means all those go away. So you're basically back to a single universe, with pretty much three-dimensional, 4-dimensional with space-time. You're back to that, and all the how the complexity level that exists. And even if, I don't believe in so many billions of years, because, God could have inflated the universe very fast to where it is. It could be much, much younger than we think. We've got proof neither way. And even when we look at a lot of artifacts and all that, we find a lot of mixing. And even in dinosaur tissue, we find biological material. Millions of years it wouldn't survive. A lot of it doesn't make sense. And it's excused by, they give, biologists have come up with some of the most bizarre and ridiculous arguments why it exists, but they don't stand test. When you scrutinize something, the probability of something like that surviving for that long is just impossible. Just because you see the universe, so that we don't really understand how quickly inflation happened. to spread it to such a vast distances. And it may have been a requirement by God in order to be able to, the uncreated energies of God, the things that we sort of can see in the quantum physics, is maybe that's the only thing we will, beyond the Higgs field, may be able to see, maybe, I don't know, those uncreated energies of God controlling and keeping creation from collapsing. So, it's a very, difficult, it's a hard thing to explain or that. It's a mystery, true, in that regard. But what we look from the fossil side, from a lot of these sort of things, a lot of things don't make sense anymore. The more we've been lied to, that's a reality. A lot of things have been kept, and biologists, and sometimes come recently out and argue the reason why we did that is because the religious people would jump onto this and say, oh, look, their system doesn't work, or their stuff is weak. There's no transitional species, only adaptation, as the Christians say. Because you can take a dog and change it into all sorts of different types, adaptation. So you don't need basically to, and that's why we don't find transitionals. Which has been, they found something they were arguing in China, and then it was down as let's say, a speculative from their side, but I would call it fraud because they promoted it in a certain way. But the reality is, they're on thin ice as far as their atheist ideology goes in that regard. And the fine-tuning, the revelations and all the archaeological evidence more and more that's come out recently, finding the chariots further south in an area where it's impossible to get a tsunami or get any other sort of natural effects to basically explain what happened there. The glassing of the sand, and powerful force, which is nothing that existed technologically back then. There's a lot of things that just don't make sense. Now, a lot of the scientists will just argue it away, or archaeologists, and make out, it's their bullshit story, because they can't explain it, so they come up with bullshit stories. Rather than saying, look, we don't know. That would be the honest thing to say. We just do not know. But no, they fear the theists, or people that believe in God, and that's why they have to come up with nonsense in order to keep their arguments alive, so to speak. I mean, even Richard Dawkins now talks about little green men doing panspermia. God, ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Because that, you still have the complexity issue to explain away. Even worse, if you've got little green men, how, not enough time for them to evolve and then to basically acquire interstellar capability and all that. Just nonsense. So that's all gone to shit for them in that regard. Anyway, how do we get all these religious things? I did get around to listening to Alex Crater. No, I haven't. Not yet. I've been really busy with family things with Dad and his health issues and his cataracts and sorting out a whole lot of different things for the old boy. Yep, I will get onto it at some stage. I'll take a look. Yeah, I can't even remember what is he into. I can't remember. You said something, but it's too many things to keep a track on. Anyway, in terms of what I think going forward in terms of the US, I think that the Trump administration, to some extent, is trapped in this. Is trapped in the sense of the current economics. It's really hard. give you an example. There's far too much money printing that's actually happened, far too much inflation in the system. If you try to basically cut government spending severely, now if they get rid of waste, like $2 trillion, they're saying they could get rid of that sort of waste and redirect some of those funds into productivity measures, then they could maybe get something better. But if they, on the other hand, go in the other direction of trying to cut too severely and all that, what they'll do is they'll collapse aggregate demand in the economy and they'll shrink the GDP and they'll blow out the debt even further. So that's a dangerous thing to do. As I said, I'm less concerned about the debt unless they do something like that. I would rather have them, as I said, take that $300 billion of the green bullshit deal. They've frozen it. Don't give it back to Treasury. Take it and use it for infrastructure, telecommunications, and oil and gas pipelines and high-speed rail. That's what they need to do with that sort of money, because that's going to put a lot of people back into work. Those people pay taxes. They move a lot of those workers into the middle classes much more easier, which means you're increasing demand in the economy as well. New demand, because it comes from new money. These are poorer people now that are doing manual work like building roads, building infrastructure and stuff like that. That pushes up the level of activity in the general economy to also support, as I said, bringing back some industries and all that. You still need people to have purchasing power. So you need to have new money in the economy, so to speak. So that's what he really needs to focus on, doing those sort of things, because money printing is not going to do it like before. That was sort of an artificial growth in the system, but it's not a real thing. The problem is now you don't want to shrink too severely, but you want to enable more growth in the system. I think he's got a few things there, the energy side, bring back some manufacturing and stuff like that, but he needs to, the other components are required as well. And those other components are telecommunications, high-speed rail, road and bridge infrastructure, stuff like that, get a lot of people back to work, and also lower the cost of doing business in America, moving things around, so to speak. And so that these are all important. That's where that money should go. I'm going to leave a comment on Trump's official site and actually explain a couple of these things and some of the macroeconomics for him on X. So I haven't done it yet. I was thinking about it today as about this live stream. So I was going milling things through my head. So I will definitely leave a few things, and I hope he considers them in that regard. That's all I can do. So what was that again? Alex made a particular call on the recent Syria takeover, and also recently had an interesting take on the Trump US. Okay, I'll check him out. I'll try and at least check one of his most recent one to see what he's actually had to say. Odd question, but did Woodrow Wilson quote in his book The New Freedom? I don't remember. I think he may have. There was something that he but he, remember, Woodrow Wilson was the guy who actually brought in the central bank in America, the Fed. He was definitely a globalist, and that's why he got America involved in the First World War. He was, like Roosevelt, another globalist. So yeah, that's Franklin. not Theodore, the one further back. Well, yeah, Theodore was a bit, but not to the same. He was more within the Western Hemisphere, the Americas. America hadn't branched further out at that stage. It was still trying to consolidate in Theodore's time the dominance within the Western Hemisphere, as it's called, which is the Americas. Maybe it's a while ago, but it's familiar. But I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. I'm getting old. 58. Memory. Yes. When I was younger, I could recall things much faster. And he said some of the biggest men in the US is in the field of manufacturing, commerce, are afraid of something they know that is a power somewhere or organised. True. Look, I think people like that do realise certain things. Yes, they definitely do. I mean, I say there's millions and millions of, telescopes looking up. If there was anything there, they would have seen it. There's private, public, all sorts of things. People think that they are coming from somewhere parallel space. Well, what's in subspace? Nasty fallen angels. We know what they call demons. And beyond that, angels. Even the sort of recent thing where these circular things rotating like mad and all that mimic very much the angels, which are the most powerful ones close to God. And they actually say that in the past, in the Cuban Missile Crisis, similar things had emerged which had turned off some of the nuclear ballistic systems in America, not in Russia. In Russia, the humans intervened, one of the officers, and said no, and stopped this sort of thing. God didn't need to intervene. But in America, crazies there were ready to press the button. That's, who's crazier than the Americans or the Russians? Yes. And so there was no technology on the planet Earth that could do that. And it just sort of appeared from nowhere. From the noetic realm, which is beyond the metaphysical realm. So, yes. But in terms, yes, they did. They did. True. What's limited about? I don't know anything about economics, but I do understand the US owed someone US dollars, so was hoping when printing all the need to switch currencies, and then does else owe a lot of look in. Remember, the economics is just basically people, humans that believe in something, have confidence in something, are willing to support something. Um, a dollar could be used for toilet paper or as a means of exchange. Depends what people think of it. Ultimately, you can be in Zimbabwe, where you basically destroy the agricultural sector and kick out all, the productive white farmers, and start printing like mad so you can pay your troops and all that, and collapse the whole economy practically. But you inflate a lot of the debt of those elites, and then they come in and buy and take over all that land. And that's what happened. So wasn't the poor farmers that got any of it? It was these wealthy. So, creating inflation. Remember, debt is money. just another form of it. So when you increase the debt, you increase the money supply. You increase the amount of money, credit, it's all the same. It just depends on which part of the ledger you're on. Whether you're you've got that as debt or you've got that as an asset. So it depends. But it's all, the totality of that money represents the economy in a certain way. So when you print more, what you do is you steal productivity from the real economy. That's why I consider banking a parasitic activity, and why, as an Orthodox Christian, usury is evil. That's why bankers, pretty much the banking's whole thing, has a sort of an evil dimension to it in that regard. Now, as far as how that system works, when you reduce, like Harry Truman did after the Second World War, the money supply, not using the money from, where he taxed these elites, and that's why he didn't invite in some of these meetings any of the bankers, because he knew they hated him. He was, Midwestern, middle class type person, small business. He didn't really like the bankers either, as they didn't like him. And pretty much by reducing the debt to GDP, using those tax dollars not to basically give them out as welfare or bullshit like the modern day so-called socialist Democrats and many others similar to them do, and even some of the Republicans for votes. He took that and lowered the level of debt of the US economy. That meant that those workers now were still being paid, let's say, as an example, $10 a day. As an example, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what they were being paid. Now, if you shrink the money supply by half, as an example, it wasn't by half, just using it as an example to make the point, that single dollar now can buy double the commodities, the goods and services in the economy, because that has much more purchasing power. But when you print more money, increase the money supply, what it means is that dollar now can only buy less, maybe half. As an example, if you double the money supply. But usually it's doubled over small periods. You've seen the erosion of the US dollar, like 90% nearly, over 100 odd years or whatever. Slowly but surely. And so all the technological innovations and development, the cheap energy, the robotics and all that happened through the 50s and 60s and 70s and all that, or all that great wealth that was created was transferred to the elites, because through money printing, they could inflate the value of their assets and leverage to buy and grab more stuff. And as long as that money printing was happening and they were leveraging, what they were doing also at the same time is lowering their debt to equity, because their equity was valued more because of the, as an example, to make the point, let's say I buy a house for $1 million and I increase substantially within 10 years the money supply. Now that, because there's more money chasing less assets, that now has gone from that to $5 million, the house. Before, I may have had 90%, 10% equity, and $900,000 that I owed. Now it's worth 5 million. And so my debt now to equity is less than 20% I didn't have to do anything magical. I just made a whole lot of money. That's how people make money in real estate. Got it? That's how they become wealthy. You can be the dumbest idiot as long as you're willing to take risk in that sort of system. But if they were printing and they're on a Ponzi scheme, running a Ponzi scheme, and you jump on it, you can be the dumbest fuck in the world. You can still make a lot of money and become very capital rich. And as long as you get in early, you know. So, but it's parasitic because it's taking real wealth from the people that are producing goods and services, because their income, their purchasing power of their income is being eroded. And that is being transferred to these other people who are inflating other asset classes, which they are leveraging on it. I'm giving it really like dumb simplicity so people can understand how this system works, how you transfer wealth. So when you Reaganomics and Thatcherism that liberated the banks pretty much caused a decline. That's why I don't like Reagan. A decline in the income of destroyed the middle classes and just grew the big bankers. That's what really happened. Okay, that's why the entire Britain has been impoverished, and you've only got a small section of bankers in London who made a lot of money. Got it? In the long run, that's what happened. That's what money printing does for you. Debasing the currency makes the small end of town, the elites, a hell of a lot wealthier. So they don't care. As I said, even in Zimbabwe, they didn't care where it got to, because these people were asset rich. So, if people can't afford to eat because their Zimbabwean dollars don't really count for much, they don't care. These people are trillionaires in terms of their currency, and their debt was very little. Now it's even less. They can just grab a pile of money and just hand it to the banks and pay off all their debts, and now they own all these assets, and they are wealthy oligarchs. Got it? So if I'm in a, let's say, a third world country and I want to control it and own everything, all I do is just inflate the money supply and have the soldiers fed and controlling the rest of the population. Whoever gets out of line, knock them off, and I just then own within a decade or 12 years, I own everything. And then you're my servants and slaves. Got it? So, yeah, that's why bankers love money printing. You got to understand that. And they'll always tell you, oh, if we don't do it, the whole banking system's going to fall over and it's going to destroy the economy. Bullshit. What happened when they overdid it in Sweden back in I think it was the 90s? What do? They basically nationalised them because they were worthless, recapitalised them, took all the bad assets out, resold them to the open market and let others, private individuals, play with them. And those bad assets appreciated as the new cycle of boom to bust was the new boom cycle. Remember what I said earlier about a barter economy and an open system and a closed system? When you've got a currency, you can deflate and inflate the economy, depending on the supply. So again, it has a distorting effect. That is why when people argue, we should allow the markets to decide and all that. Bullshit. Just create another crisis. We used to have them back in the gold standard days. It's an open system. You can't physically do it because people will abuse the money supply in one way or another. Always happens. Human nature, greed. It's just the way it is in that regard. So you need sensible people that care about the average person to try and keep the thing. So that's why I say anyism, follow anyism, you're a moron. And if you basically follow any so-called rational economic models or whatever, you're also a moron because you don't understand basic fundamental principles. You've got an open system, can be abused by people. Simple as that. There is no perfect system. Only God can provide a perfect paradise. The rest of them, they're just selling you shit. It just doesn't work. And the last time we had a closed type barter system where I marked how many sheep I had and how many whatever else I had, that was a very long time ago. Very long time ago. That was probably an economy which is, stable, but also could be affected by environmental effects like flooding, bad crop years or whatever. So you could still get into trouble because they had less technological capacity to mitigate some of these things. So their things were losing things, and all of a sudden, because of a flood or whatever, the food supply just shrunk all of a sudden, and a whole lot of people are going to starve because, you don't have capacity to create things out of nothing like that. We're not gods. So anyway, so subtool to subtool, so watch, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they are better not speak about in the breath when they speak in the condemnation of it. Yes, I know what you mean. Look, there are dark forces, and some do associate with them because they think they can get benefits. Stu mentioned Woodrow, and we could mention that our leader, Billy Hughes, quotes about the buddy fawns. Yeah, sort of. It's for another day. I do want to do a video, on this, about Woodrow, about Billy Hughes, about a number of leaders, Australian and American and European ones. But I don't want to go into these. We're just covering the Trump era at the moment, but I will cover some of these characters because there's interesting information about them and their life and what they were up to. So, and even there's a few people out there that have looked into some of these characters and their associations to different groups. Lemmy. So, and what these groups, and it's not only the Masonics, there's a whole lot of different groups out there that have got different agendas or similar agendas, and and some of them even interact, some of them don't. Or they're competitors for whatever reason. Sorry, I'm limited to typing out so much character letters. Look, I don't mind. The whole purpose is to interact with my subscribers, answer your questions, or for you to basically probe me about certain subject matters. You can disagree as well. I don't, I've got a thick skin. I don't take it personal. I'm not God. I'm not the source of all knowledge and without fault or anything like that. I'm human. I'm just well read, with a bit extra knowledge compared to the average person, and with a very slightly different perspective, because when you've got a lot of information going all the way back from antiquity on the way economic systems, societies functioned and all that, all the way through to modern, you've got a much deeper understanding. You end up with how things evolve and develop economically over time and why they do, and how technology can affect and interact in the way economic systems emerge. So you could, let's say a lot of people worry about digital currencies. So do I. Now you can have a digital currency which is like the Chinese, where if you get on the wrong side with your social credit, you can't even eat. I remember seeing a video of this young girl. Her family her father ended up giving her a credit card. They tracked it down to her that she was using her father's credit card to feed herself, and they banned him as well. So now they're down to the mother and the brother to be able to, it's ridiculous. That's how crazy that system is. But on the other hand, it can be a very useful way of interacting. I mean, we use our phones, we use our cards or whatever to interact and purchase things on the fly quickly and all that. So the technology can be useful in that way. But if you've got the right piece of legislative protection to prevent these people misusing it, or the right type of, then the technology can be useful, can enhance productivity, can enhance transactions and lower transaction costs and all that, and be quite useful and have a positive effect. But are also, with groups like DEI, ESG, crazies like Larry Finn from BlackRock and people like that, if they have their way, it'll be used for nefarious reasons, for the wrong reasons. So it's not the technology, it's the people and the characters and all that. It's not the car that kills, but the people misusing the car or the gun or the knife or whatever. So we need to not demonize technology, but make it clear that it's the misuse by certain people in that regard. So that's the way we need to view things. And that's the right way that a Christian would understand this and view these things. Because there are advantages. I mean, we use some of this technology. It's an advantage in that regard. It's not as smart as people think. I sort of, when I hear people saying about the way they describe AI, I go, you got no idea. It's an expert system, but doesn't really work that well. It can't interpret things properly. It gets confused. It sometimes comes up with absolute gibberish that doesn't make sense, and you have to correct it manually. So, and then you have to go, okay, why is it doing this? What is wrong with the algorithms? Maybe we need to recode it and change some of the parameters and all that. So to make it to be able to distinguish a bit better. I mean, I think in general, intelligence is really hard to really develop. But even if you were to get approximate to it, it has to learn to think differently. That means it needs to have a macro, micro, because it focuses too much on the micro, doesn't see the big picture, so to speak, and gets confused by all the details and comes up with gibberish. We think very differently, and we view the world very differently. We don't see all the frequencies. We don't see everything. We see in big macro blob type form in that regard. But it's really hard to code that into a system because it seems to always revert to it becomes too detailed based. And I think you have to basically make it less detailed based. But then what happens is you lose some of the fine, its ability to detect certain things, subtle things, and point them out or whatever. But in the other way, it also comes up with a lot of gibberish in its understanding of, it views the world very differently than we do. And as a consequence, it comes up with a lot of gibberish. Whether that can be overcome, look, humans have been trying to train AIs and changing algorithms and giving them other parameters and rules. But you know what? Even humans have got poor understanding about a lot of things. And so because we have a poor understanding, it's the old thing, junk in, junk out. You know what I mean? So it's that thing, which is a bit of a weakness. So that's why I don't fear the technology. What I fear is humans misusing the technology to control humans, to undermine freedom, to monitor and surveil people. That's the stuff that I really worry about more. Either a soft form of authoritarianism, potentially shifting to a harder one over time. These are the things that worry me. And we have to be proactive citizens. We need to basically put a blowtorch on every politician that we interact with to make it quite clear to these buggers that, this is not on. And if they want to make a digital currency, fine. We want guarantees that it won't be misused, that it will be, underpinned by a referendum on it that will basically guarantee that the state can only use it for transactional purposes and no other. So you can actually do that and you end up with a digital currency, but no restrictions. It's just another form of money compared to the paper form and nothing else in that regard. So digital currency isn't the problem, it's the misuse of it. That's what I think we all fear about it. What's your view of Yanis Varoufakis? Not very highly, not very high. I even think some of his economics are shit anyway, but that's for another day. Propose economic machinations. Leave out the cliche woke social ideologies. Yes, he's very much that. He talks about debt, as all others do, but no one says who the debt is owed to. Well, the debt is owed to a lot of different players. It's not one person that it's owed to. It's not owed to, the ledger. You can have, because nowadays everything, even regular mums and dads through a fund manager can own part of that debt. If you know what I mean, they could own some bonds, even the average person. So debt can be owned by, obviously the elites own most of it, but a lot of different people in the economy can own debt, so, I've had bonds in the past, many other people. So anybody can, you don't have to be super rich. You can be just middle class like myself. So no, that's not the case. I haven't said anything of recent stuff. I have agreed with, I don't really agree with his entire thinking. It's that some of the stuff that he says, yes, makes sense. Some of his macroeconomic perspectives, yes, make sense. And the points that he was making to Seuerberg, who was basically somebody who basically studied more like traditional accounting and those sort of, was not an economist, did not understand macroeconomics. I do not understand why Merkel actually ever made him a finance minister, because the guy was incompetent, really incompetent. Absolutely. Even some of the Americans laughed. They said, "What's wrong with the Germans? Are they that stupid at the political level?" Putting Seuerberg there, who has no understanding of basic macroeconomic theories. So no, he was absolute lightweight. And the stuff that Yanis was pointing out about the errors of Seuerberg, the German finance minister at the time, he was correct. They were just ridiculous and stuff. God, what can one say? He didn't understand that the debt actually grows an economy, but at a personal level, debt lessens spending or the capacity to spend or purchase, in a sense, the purchasing power of a person, of an individual person. The two aren't the same, because if you try to shrink, as I said, the money supply, you don't actually reduce the amount of debt, but what you do is you reduce the amount of GDP activity, economic activity. And then what happens to the debt? It goes through the roof. The amount of debt, actually the amount of money debt that Greece owes has actually come down in terms of euros. It's less. But even now, current debt to GDP is much higher. Why? Because their economy is growing slower and declining to some extent. So, you contract the economy, your debt to GDP increases. Not the amount of debt, but in terms of percentages, because your economy becomes smaller. That becomes less sustainable. So what did the US do at the time of 2008? Money printed quite a bit, and also increased oil to bring down hold inflation under control to some extent. But it also, what it did was it had the ability to pick up the economy and reduce debt to GDP. But it also, because you increased the money supply, it didn't fix the problem. It just transferred some wealth to the speculators who speculated even more and are creating new crises. See, one crisis begets another, because of the money supply, as I said from the beginning. When you have a money supply that's out of control, ultimately you get into a cycles of debt, cycles of crises, due to the exponentially growing debt. The debt isn't the problem. It's in relation to the rest of the economy. What is it doing in that regard? So, yeah, got to think a bit differently in that regard. Yeah, look, his politics are shit. As far as I'm concerned, Yanis is just a socialist, with, an extreme leftist socialist with some bizarre neo-Marxist, libertarian, semi-libertarian in that regard, and some non-libertarian ideas, woke ideas, all in one. And I don't know how he has consolidated these strange bedfellows in his thinking, but he has. Yeah. So anyway, I occasionally do watch a bit just to see what he's talking about. But I had more respect when he was the finance minister and talking about macroeconomics. He made more sense than what he is nowadays. Nowadays, he's just bullshit crap that he's coming up with. So, I mean, these people can't even come up with a credible system. They've got all these isms, but they can't even come up with a credible system. I mean, I can come up with better things, than what they can come up with. I'll give you an example. If you were to make a market-based socialism, as an example, a truly market-based socialism where there was no capitalists whatsoever, all the means of production belong to the people, so to speak, in that regard, you'd still have to have a mechanism for investment capital. So you'd have to allow some capitalists, that means maybe 50% of the shareholding belonging in any corporation as a maximum, being able to be with investors or an investor. The other half would go to all the workers. And the moment you left the business, you lost that. You went to another business. You became a shareholder in that. So you earned part of the shareholding and also a salary in that regard. So you're basically a citizen capitalist in a sense. And, that in terms of, and having control on the money supply as well, in that regard, you could over time with technology, cheap energy, lifting the productivity continuously from one generation to another, you could make every single worker, you could shift them nearly into the upper middle class, potentially, over time, and have a citizen army like in ancient Greece, in, an agora where they basically interacted and all that. Sort of, that doesn't mean you wouldn't have crises, because you'd still have, and the reason why you'd need 50% for those other people, the investors and whatever else, is because you'd still need some mechanism of rewarding. You'd still have wage differences. So people that created innovation, thinking, great engineers and all that would be paid substantially more, that have still the similar shareholding percentages, but they salary-wise would be paid substantially more, because you need innovators in that regard. And that's the only way I could think of, even for them, a system that would make certain sense. And because, that 50% would be those workers, and if they left one company and went to the other, they just get a proportion of that, of the dividends, and somebody else that came here would get that. They couldn't transfer like he wanted. They couldn't transfer any of the ownership. The ownership would stay with that entity, with the people that work it. If somebody was of that way inclined to be able to create a market-based system, to be able to regulate prices and stuff like that, and at the same time provide greater prosperity for the majority, and the minority give them a 50% sort of equity and a 50% sort of the profits, they'd still be wealthy, but they wouldn't be super wealthy like they are elsewhere. You could make some sort of socialist market-based system that would be the closest thing. What I can't understand is, how can I come up with it, being in the bathtub and just, with some Epsom salts, and come up with that thought. And these guys who are basically slaughtering each other for hundreds of years can't come up with something workable, is beyond me. Yes. So I'm not saying I necessarily subscribe to this model. It's a thought thing that somebody, if they were going to create a market-based socialism in the way they think, you would still have a problem with innovation, is the biggest problem, because you'd need people to be able to create their own businesses. And so people that could do that in other economies would achieve far more innovation, and you would fall behind. A bit like Europe is too socialised. These big old corporations and all that, and very close with unions and all that. What do? No innovation. So that it ultimately doesn't work. But if you're going to put something credible together that made a bit of sense, it'd be something like that. I'm just arguing from the opposite part of the, if I was a socialist, how would I come up with the most credible model? How like a socially conservative, a person like myself, a centrist, socially conservative person, can come up with something like that, and these asshats can't come up with something similar, who believe in that? It's ridiculous, but it just shows how ridiculous their ideology is, and they can't think beyond that sort of the model. Their model is, this sort of power structure of the state controlling everything, as if the state is this sort of, they have, their poison is statism. That's really what it is. Their ideology is statism. The powerful state, communists, Chinese, the social democratic type socialists in Europe and all that. It's just the big mummy state is their thing. And that's why they can't conceptualize a small state a free market type socialism. They can't conceptualize that because they are so welded to the cult of statism, you know, pretty much. And some of the bankers love that as well because they're fascists. That's the real fascists, that collaboration between the banking elites and the state, the status. That's why, remember, who financed even the Russian Revolution? Bankers it was. I mean, they even made sure they got Lenin from Switzerland to St. Petersburg in an armoured train financed by German bankers. I mean, you can't make this shit up. It's just this is how they operate. So it's I mean, they can never come up with anything like this. And a clown like me can in the bathtub with his Epsom salts, and they can't come up with something innovative like that. It's ridiculous, isn't it? Have you ever heard of the Findus cult? No, I haven't. Findus cult? No, I haven't. Who are they? Can you please provide me with more information? Are they a Luciferian type group, or which I haven't never heard of? Let me just Finders movement. Finders were. Hang on. I'll just read this out. I won't put it on the screen. Finders movement were an intentional community of cult founders in Washington, D.C. in the early 1970s by former United States Air Force Master Sergeant Marion Petty. The finders came to a wider public attention when two members of the movement were arrested in Tallahassee, Florida in 1987 and charged with misdemeanor child abuse of 6 children, all that. Okay. Are these Satanists? Are these Satanists? Because I'm not going to read the whole lot. So it's like the modern day abusers that they say in America, the Satanists and all that. The men were, I'm not going to read the whole lot. It goes, the oldest. Can you put down, are they, these guys, was this guy a Satanist or some other thing? According to U.S. District Court records in Washington, confiscated police sources have previously told authorities the finders were a cult that conducted brainwashing techniques at warehouses in Grove Park duplex raided by law enforcement. This source told being recruited by the finders and promised financial rewards and sexual gratification. Okay, so they used pedophilia to try and lure certain people in. But as I said, I don't want to read the whole lot because this is just a Wikipedia page and it may not, because I can't see anything about, what's this? What was that? This allegations against the finest. Despite the resolution, the issue was brought to wider attention in 1993 when Henry T. Skip Clements, an officer in private sector consulting and the resident of Stuart, Florida, obtained a copy of the 1987 report that stated that the DC Police Department investigation of the finders had been dropped as a CIA internal matter. Okay, Clements alleged that the Central Intelligence Agency had to compel the US Customs Service to cease the investigation, supposedly because the commune was used as a front to train agents. Okay. Well, this doesn't surprise me. The US has set up a lot of cults. The CIA has set up a lot of cults and have used, yes, this happened during the satanic panic of 19 of the 80s. Okay. We're having one currently, and I wouldn't be surprised if people within the intelligence apparatus are also involved in these nefarious things. Okay, found pictures, child ritualization, cutting up goats and all that. Well, some of the recent stuff that have been talked about, just better be careful how I word things with YouTube, because we know what they're like. In white robes, yeah, sounds like satanic. Black and white robes, depending on the group and all that. Yeah, I'll just put that up. This is part of these demonic elites that partake in this. They think that they can actually gain power. It's these rituals for them is to what they perceive that doing these things will give them power from the gods or from, we know who, Mr. Lucifer himself. No different than some of the ritualistic, nasty things that have happened in the past by different cultures around the world, as we know. So human sacrifice isn't new. It's been happening for a very long time by a number of elites. So not only Western elites, but many others more openly. And let's not forget, look at what's happening in our culture since, Christianity has shrunk in the West in particular, in many parts of the West. What has happened? Things like cannibalism has been normalized. Remember, certain people, certain atheists were promoting it as an option to, use human cells to generate new types of meats and all that, which eating ourselves sort of things, really demonic. You also had a lot of these, look at the different pride flags, the one that I'm talking about, the pedo flag, all these being normalized and all that sort of stuff. What next? Human sacrifice being normalized? Oh, that's right. They've misunderstood people that have this need to sacrifice other humans. Really? So, yeah, we are living in dark times, in a new, what I call it a new dark age. Remember, even in the dark ages, there was technological innovation, the printing press, a whole lot of things. So you can still have technological development, but you can be spiritually and culturally in a dark age. This post-human new dark age that we have entered in is becoming crazier and crazier. So that doesn't surprise me, because the CIA set up a lot of different groups and cults that they used for all sorts of nefarious things, not only in America, in other countries as well, including Greece. But that's for another day to cover a lot of this sort of stuff. But the elites have been up to their dirty little tricks globally, doing a number of these things. But a lot of this ritual sort of sacrifice, and in particular children, because they know they are, because the sacrifice of Christ took away what we call that, forgave us for that for the downfall of Adam and Eve. It's that complete loop in that cycle. So, and the new covenant that came after that. So children are born innocent, the way we view it in Orthodox Christology, for that reason, because of Christ. So for them to sacrifice children, it's basically an opposition to God, is really what it is. It's evil, but it's, as I said, an opposition to God. That's really what it's part of, the real agenda of these nefarious people. And unfortunately, in this world where there's much more, what I say, compliant idiots, we call them atheists, but they're compliant idiots with these agendas. is due to it's the reason why the less faith in the West has, you could say, produced monsters in the world, monsters, true monsters. And these monsters, if we're not careful, could devour us in the short term. I don't believe in the long term, but in the short term, yes, they can do a lot of mayhem. Very true. Yes. But interesting. I'll check them out. I'll keep that there so I can actually take a look at some other stage. And everybody forgot to tell me it's 9 o'clock. Shut eyes and change to the other glasses. Anyway, guys, I thought people were going to ask me more about Trump than what they did. Anyway, I have covered things about Trump. I will do other live streams in the future covering different subject matters, and probably again revisiting Trump again, and Vance and many others that are involved, and some of the European leaders as well. I think they need to be covered as well. Very much so. We're over 3 hours, so I'm going to call it quits because I do have live streams tomorrow, and I do have a few things that I have to do early in the morning. Then have Australia Day lunch with Dad, and then so it'll be quite hectic and quite involved tomorrow. It would be on the main channel, so the Australia Day one. So they'll come over, ask me questions, ask me controversial questions. I don't mind. I'll answer them in that regard. Thank you, Lemmy. Thank you as well for being here. Thanks for supporting the Harry Serpanos Opinions channel. Hopefully we can get more people to subscribe to it and support it so it can grow, because unless people subscribe, Al Gore doesn't push it out. You know how it works. And there is an opportunity now for it to grow, this channel and the other one, because as I said, they got rid of all the strikes, all the warnings and stuff like that. They got rid of all that as Trump was coming in as the new presidency. But remember, we've probably got 4 years where we can sort of grow a bit, and then after that, it's going to be, depending on who's in, a much harder slog. I believe. I don't think we're out of the woods yet by any stretch of the mark. It was nice talking to you. See you later. Yeah, likewise. Thanks for all the questions as well, because you sort of kept the live stream going to a large extent, a few others. So I do thank you, because I need things, points or questions to be able to answer, to keep the live stream going. So I do thank you for your participation, because it really helped me going into a number of different areas and covering a number of different points in that regard. Paul, where have you been, mate? I believe nobody knows what Trump will do. You're probably right in that regard. Anything possible. But he is constrained by certain macroeconomics and certain other things. So he has a certain level of freedom, but not he doesn't have gods like freedom. But yes, I know what you mean, your sentiment, true. But where are you? Were you on Zoom with Ricardo from Kiwi Land? Yeah, you're late. God. So yes, I will be promoting a Zoom session, Paul, and everyone else, for next weekend. So what I'll do is I'll set up a Zoom. I'll use the same one. I'll just promote the same Zoom, so we don't have to change passwords or anything, Paul. So don't worry. And I'm just going to promote it for a day where I'm going to be on and off just coming on and off and just chatting with anyone that wants to chat about anything. And you can chat amongst yourselves. It's the whole purpose of it. So we might as well get some benefit out of it. So I'll be promoting on this channel and the other channel, the Zoom, where people can come on and ask anything: nutrition, geopolitics, religion, whatever. I don't care what people ask. Anything you want to ask. And it also just means that we can socialise, discuss, or, it's like sometimes people come and ask me about health issues. It'll be like a live, an interactive consultancy in a sense. I don't mind. In that regard, I just enjoy interacting with people. I'm a social creature. You're always hearing something new that you didn't think about or didn't take into consideration. An angle or some group or whatever can be interesting, because somebody asked me once, if you had the average intelligence or knowledge but all the wealth in the world, or a bum on the street with all the knowledge and all that, I'd pick the bum. Honestly, I'd pick the bum, because you can't take the other stuff with you. But from a bum with all the knowledge, you can still make something of your life. So that's the sort of mindset that I've got. I don't value, you could say, worldly treasures, but I value knowledge and insights into things far more. Anyway, guys, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Take care. And hopefully I will see some of you lovely people tomorrow in the other 2 live streams for Australia Day, so we can celebrate. I'll even drink some ciders, Paul, on the day. I'll even pop a few celebratory ciders. Just don't tell the bald man over in Kiwi land. He may get upset and may send Ted over. And that could be very messy. Anyway, guys, thanks for being here. See you. Good night. Take care, or have a good day if you're in Europe or in somewhere there much earlier than for here. It's nearly 9, just 9:16 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, so daylight savings. Anyway, take care. See you all.